Hello, I'm Mike Berry. I'm one of the directors of the FRG Foundation. This is one of the videos in the series on how to write a grant application to the FRG Foundation. Specifically, this goes into the details of the grant for academic research grants. What I will do is go through the 5-page detailed research grant application. I will use one of my own grant proposals which I've modified for this purpose, and I've put in a bit of fictitious text in Latin so as not to distract from the main message that we would like to get out of this. Okay, so let's look at the main document. The first thing we should note about the document is the layout. Make sure you use lots of white space. Do not try to cram text into the space available. Remember that there are specialists and non-specialists who will read your grant application. We do not want to fill it up with text and make the presentation far too busy. So we would start off with the objectives. We would move down to the context. We would look in context, the theoretical framework, then move down to the methodology, look at data collection and validation strategies. We would look at data analysis, and then we would look at the schedule of our research. What are the activities that we're going to do when? Let's look at the main components. I've highlighted important components of the proposal. Quite clearly, different proposals will have different emphasis and different structure, but this is one way of doing them, and it's worked for me, I guess. So let's look at the first sentence. Okay, so the first sentence says, my objective is to develop a particular type of theory. Now you might remember, theory can explain and predict, or we can look about theory of design. The FRG Foundation will also look at projects where you actually design something. So this is an interdisciplinary research project. They are the most difficult ones I've found to do and to write proposals for, and so I'm using this particular one. So second sentence, I've talked the situational context, and then specifically. So I've gone from the general to the specific. Right in the first 3 sentences, most research starts with a question. So what I've said here right up front is the primary question is X. It is informed by questions 2, 3, and 4. It's one way of, as I said, of writing your proposal. It is not the only one, but it's a good way of getting it from the general down to the specific and what are the questions that you're going to ask. Remember, this is a proposal. You want to hit your audience with what you're going to do and why it's important. Okay, let's look at this animal here called definition quickly. Most applications would not have that here. Okay, in this instance, I've defined a particular term that different readers might interpret differently. I've put in what we've called an operational definition. This is the way it's defined for this particular application. Okay, and that is the way you as the reader should interpret it. You may have a different interpretation as the reader, but this is the one that applies here. As the proposal writer, that makes sure that your audience focuses on what you're talking about, and that's really what is important here. Next, let's look at this sentence over here. The research is significant because it addresses a gap in land administration theory. Tell your readers right up front why your research is significant. Next, this might be important. It is interdisciplinary. The perspective is land administration, but it draws on a variety of different types of theory. Why is that important? Because different disciplines have different biases and different ways of looking at a particular problem. An interdisciplinary project, as I've said, is very difficult to write because people from different disciplines will look at your research proposal differently and perhaps from their biases or what they would like to be doing rather than what you're talking about. So make sure you focus them on your view of the problem and what you want to do in that particular area. You cannot cover the whole area, and nor can they. You want them to evaluate your proposal and what you're doing within the scope of what you've defined. I haven't highlighted it. There are numerous works on land administration and registration. Okay, so we can say there's a lot of work in this particular area. And I said, while recognizing the value of these works, the theory emerging from this study is original in that 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. In summary or in synthesis, if landholders do not do the following, what we've got here is a closing sentence for the paragraph. Okay. This is what we need to do to address this particular problem. Then an impact statement. So the impact beyond the research community is X, i.e. a contribution to practical theory, a contribution to best practice. Give us a couple of lines on that. Now just note the Latin here is just fill in text. You do not have to go and write anything in Latin. You're welcome to write it, but nobody will understand it. Okay. Let's look at the challenge. Why is this worth doing? The global land tenure challenge is immense. Okay, so we can start off with a general statement. The next sentence, we put some numbers to that, quantify it. Okay, so what's the impact of your research? Go from the general to the specific, down to the exact problem that you're looking at, and then we have our fill-in text again. And then to close off that, the study builds on the applicant's land tenure administration research. We would expect you, as an emerging academic applying for one of these grants, that you would have done some work in this area already. It would be unusual for you to start a completely new research area. You should be an emerging expert in this particular area. So if you've done work in the area, tell the committee, the study builds on this. I've done work in this area before. As we've said in one of our earlier videos, we want to see focus. You should be in a focused area of research. We're not looking at funding research managers who supervise a lot of different projects and don't do the work themselves. We want to see the work that you've done and that you're going to do yourself. Now, let's look at the context. So once again, we go from the general to the specific. In my case, a short introductory paragraph of the problem, and then we go into the details. A few sentences introducing the context of your research. Then we go into the literature review or review of previous work. Now, the classical problem that we have in literature reviews is people repeat the literature, but they don't review it. So you should write your literature review as a complete document. Then we want to see what comes out of this, what's the meat to it. So the other thing we would like to see in a literature review are what are the different perspectives of this problem context that you're looking at. So what I've written here, there are tensions in the international literature concerning the contribution of land registration as a social upliftment tool for the poor. I go into the first school. De Soto reinvigorated the economic determinism school. Okay, that's one particular theoretical perspective, and we can describe the people who subscribe to that particular theory. Then I go in and I say, a second school places social justice, stability and equity above economic goals. So this school says, yes, we agree with part of the first theory, but it's too simple. We need to look at what are the enabling conditions for that theory to work, and what are these people saying is going to happen when those conditions are not present. So, and we might look at a third theory, or what are the negative consequences. And then we get to the specific. Why is our particular study relevant? There are a few studies which examine off-register transactions as the core phenomenon of interest and at the household level. And then we would go into describing that. Okay, so, but once again, this is our gap statement. Why is your research project relevant? Then we might look at the theoretical framework if there is one. If you're looking at a design project, we would look at the designs for some technical tool that addresses a particular purpose, and you might look at the different designs. We want to look at the dimensions of your design. So in a socially oriented project, we would look at this and say, first of all, have you done any work on it before? So do you know what you're talking about? Have you written about it? So here I've said, over a number of years, the applicant has developed a theoretical framework. Then I go into the theory itself. The first part of the theory is expressed as follows. And so I describe the first part of that theory, and I separate different parts of that. The second part of the theory is that the above model should be applied in a manner which is cognizant of continual and complex change. So forget about the details there. Okay, we have a theoretical framework. We describe the different components of it. I've talked about what I've done previously on this. Then I've gone into the components of the theory, and I describe those and look at the literature related to those, and that would be what I'm going to work on. Now we go into methodology. Methodology is theory of methods. So what's the broader framework and what am I actually going to do? So we look at methodology with saying, let's look at what are you going to do to fulfill your research objectives. So what I've done here in the first sentence is I've described everything that I'm going to do. Okay, the first thing I've said is I have experience in using these methods. The second issue is the case study method. So I need to demonstrate that I've read up on case studies. The third one is semi-structured qualitative interviews. There are three things in that first sentence. And in fact, the fourth one, these are the primary data source to be most appropriate for this type of studies. Then I explain why I'm not using quantitative methods, why am I using a case study method. Then I would describe which cases that I'm going to study and why am I going to study them. The 4 cases provide very different contexts. So why are you researching a particular area? Ideally, we would say it's going to give us a different perspective on the particular problem that we're looking at. You may also have problems in getting access to particular data, so you also have constraints on what you can do and what you cannot do, and you need to describe that. Then we go into data collection and validation strategy. So I've said strategy 1, context. First, I will describe and analyze the context of each case. I will look into the literature, court cases, the history of the settlement through both interviews and documents, laws, policy, whatever applies or whatever is relevant. Validation. How do you know that your data are valid? Make sure that you've read all the research design and research methodology textbooks that are relevant to your particular project, and demonstrate that you know what they are in your proposal. Then data analysis. How are you going to analyze the data? And finally, we get to the schedule. What are you going to do in which particular year? I suggest you write this out in detail and then put it into a table like this so that you can defend it. Remember, people may follow up with you on details of your proposal. They may ask questions about it. So let's say you might make a short list. And then there would be checking to see whether you really have done the following, or people might contact you for more details on your particular project. So ensure that you know that this is valid. Okay, that's the main part of it's probably the most difficult part of writing that research proposal. So let's just summarize again. Have a look at the amount of text that is allocated to each subject area. Make sure that in your research objective and introduction section that you hit your audience in the first page with everything that is relevant to this research and why it's worth doing and what are the objectives. And we go from the general to the specific. Then we go into the context, look at the literature review, we look at the theoretical framework, and then we look at the methodology, and finally we look at the data analysis and then your schedule. Okay, that concludes the discussion on the 5-page research proposal. Just to emphasize, make sure that you read all the documentation, find yourself a mentor to assist and read your document, and good luck with it. Thank you.